Let's begin with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, help us to always see your Son for who he really is. And this we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, it's in the fall of the year 29, and I'm going to suggest that we're at a place called Mount Tabor in the Galilee. Okay? And we'll begin with the Gospel of Mark. We'll begin with chapter 2 and read through chapter 8. Mark 9, okay. 2 through 8.
Okay, so I've got it.
Okay.
Verse 8. After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him and led them up a high mountain where they were all alone. Then he was transfigured before them. His clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. And there appeared before them Elijah and Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say. They were so frightened. Then a cloud appeared and enveloped them, and a voice came from the cloud. "This is my Son, whom I love. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus.
Okay, what do you see in this story?
Well, it's presented as though it were literal, but it may very well be a vision.
Okay, all right. Hi. Okay, so we have a literal vision.
Maybe.
Okay. So, what would make you think it might be a vision instead of real?
Well, so when you see these old prophets that no one had ever seen and recognizing them right away,
Okay.
his appearance, I don't know, there's several different things that would not seem to be something that you would expect in normal life.
So it's something has happened. They look up there, these terrified disciples look up there, and they see Jesus, whom they recognize, and these 2 other characters, and something tells him or them that these are these old guys. Okay? Okay. Wonder what that was that told them that. Somehow they recognized it. Did the Spirit tell them? Who knows? Or was it a vision where they were given this insight?
Well, if you believe in the literal interpretation of scriptures, you could put your thumb on the fact of Elijah alone in the fact that he was taken up into heaven in a chariot.
Well, that's part of their history, so that no fact.
But we can't. But again, that's how you interpret scripture. To me, the most important part of this at this point is simply the recognition of Jesus formally as Christ.
Okay.
And that the disciples are allowed to see those 2 people, supposedly, and we don't know scripturally. If we look back on Moses' life, we really don't have a clear picture of how, when he died, how he left. Whether did he actually die, or did his spirit, like we think of
his
death.
grave was never found.
Exactly.
Right.
But it doesn't really.
So there's also, because the idea behind this, if you're asking the question, who is Jesus, it doesn't matter whether it was literal or a vision. Mm-hmm. The answer is to try to show us who is Jesus.
Well, I agree with that. This is something important as to who Jesus is and what he's there for. Anything else you notice about this in Mark chapter 9, verse 2 and following, about this transfiguration? What else do you notice? We'll come back to these 2 guys in a minute. Okay? What else do you notice about this story?
Is this the
But-
first time he took the three, Peter, James, and John off alone?
No, he's done this
He's
before.
done that before.
Okay, but I do want to point out then where he is, okay? How many days has it been since he was up here, up there at Caesarea Philippi? Okay, right up here, Caesarea Philippi, where they had been, looked at the gates to hell, remember? Okay, so they leave there, and how many days do they travel? Read.
Oh, every 6 days.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Right. They're not hanging around here for 6 days. They're traveling. Some people believe that it's here on the highest mountain in the area that they went up behind Caesarea Philippi, and there he was transformed. I don't think so. 6 days gives them plenty of time to walk down to here. This is Mount Tabor. It's just beyond the Sea of Galilee. And it's a lonely mountain all by itself in the middle there. Okay, which we'll see in a minute. So they have time to walk down there. Thus, if they're waiting 6 days, there's a reason. So they went somewhere. I'll suggest that it's Mount Tabor. And I'll show you why I suggest that later. Okay, anything else you notice about these? Well, we know Peter's got his issues here. You all know Peter, remember?
Oh, yeah.
He blasts something out that's actually kind of sort of there, but it's wrong. He misses it constantly, okay? But that's the way he is. He's very upfront or impetuous. Thank you. That's a good word. So, what does he say? What's he looks up there and he sees 3 guys. Okay? By the way, what are those 2 guys doing with Jesus?
Well, it said talking.
They're talking. Okay, good. So, a little while goes by, they start to stabilize their fear, their awesome, their astoundment, whatever it is. Not that that's a word, astonishment maybe. And then he says, what?
Well, let's build some places for you to stay in.
Places, plural.
Right.
Well, what that reminds me of, I was sitting back and what it reminds me of, and I think maybe that's what this is coming up in his mind, is the Festival of Booths. In the Jewish tradition, they have that holiday. And it could be the first thing that popped into his head that flashed through his mind.
Right.
It's not the idea of a permanency.
No.
It's a temporary housing.
Right.
Yeah. And maybe that's what popped into his head.
Okay. But what popped into his head was, let's build 3 of them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where his oops is. He's missing something, and we're about to find out what he missed. Okay? So, then he looks up and hey, you're lucky I'm here. We're going to build you 3 booths. And then what happens?
They disappear.
What?
They disappear.
Well, the cloud comes.
A cloud covers them.
Yeah.
Cloud? I wonder. That's kind of interesting. Okay. We'll get back to a cloud. Does that mean anything to you? What does it mean?
Well, you think of the journey and the cloud at night, or the cloud, yeah.
Cloud in the daytime and fire.
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
Which would be
The Exodus.
the Exodus, which would be,
Moses.
which would be the cloud.
Well, from God.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. God is in the cloud, or the cloud is a way of covering or hiding God. Okay? And so God now comes on all 3 of them. Is that right? Is that what it seems to be saying?
Finds all 3 of them.
So it
Okay.
appears.
And then as the cloud lifts, I assume.
Well, there's a voice first.
Voice first says, of course. Same thing as at baptism.
This is my son whom I love, listen to him.
Okay, my singular.
Listen to him.
Singular.
Yes.
And then the cloud lifts, and what's left?
Jesus.
Jesus alone. What does that tell you? What do you think then?
Jesus is greater.
Jesus is greater, okay? Anything else this might tell you? Just looking at it, and there are the 3, a cloud, God, go away, the two are gone, and there's only Jesus.
Well, so there's a couple of parts to this. One, if you look at Jesus with these great people of their past,
Yes?
that elevates Jesus' status. He's not just some dude they're walking around with.
Yes, yes. Why these two? This is important. Remember just a little while ago when Jesus, just last time we met, when he was obsessed with it, he looked at the disciples and said, "Who do people say that I am?" What did they answer? Elijah,
or the prophet.
one of the prophets of old, such as maybe Moses. So you have Elijah and Moses. Well, Moses being one of the prophets, but he, no one knows where he was buried, that kind of thing. And Elijah's lifted up. So here you have these two talking to Jesus like they're real people. Like, gee, could they possibly be alive?
So that is showing you that Jesus is not one of those two. See,
Good.
they're over there.
Yeah.
Yes. And let's exclude that stuff right now. There's Jesus.
And they were representatives of the law and the prophets. And
Ah.
whatever the message was, they've delivered it and now they're gone.
So, when it talks in the Bible about Elijah, he's the great prophet, correct? He represents the prophets. What did he look like? Any identifying feature you know of about Elijah?
He probably had a beard.
That would be unusual, because they all shave twice a day. Okay, yeah, I'm sure he had a beard. But let's go back to Elijah when he's being pursued by Jezebel. Okay? When they found him out in the wilderness, he was off in the east of the Jordan where he lived. How did they describe him? Think of John the Baptist who wanted to bring Elijah back, remember?
Oh, yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Well,
the
now,
camel hair. And
Camel hair,
eating locusts.
locust, he's out there scraggly in the wilderness. He's kind of recognizable. Especially if they just talked about him 6 days earlier. Okay? Now, so he might be recognizable. Now, Moses, on the other hand, I don't think there is a description of Moses anywhere. But of course, traditionally, there's some weird beard thing, and I don't know all, but apparently he's recognizable.
Hollywood thinks they know.
Yeah, good old Hollywood. Well, let's not trust them for our faith. Okay, sorry.
If he looked like Charlton Heston, we'd know.
Well, then we'd know. There'd be no doubt about it. Especially with a couple little horns. Okay, enough of this Solderol.
Well, the other thing is that you could say about all of them, they did not look European. They
were all blonde,
Well,
right?
we all have, because of our heritage, we all have this European idea that Jesus looked and had all the features and characteristics of a male of European descent.
Right.
And that is just
It's
unfulfilled.
wrong. It's totally wrong. Even his skin color would have been a little browner than we normally think, right? So you have to think of him as a nice big nose, a Jewish person. And they do have strong characteristics as well. So we're not going to try to describe Jesus. But we have Elijah, who is recognizable. And then you probably have a tradition of Moses, how he might look. And somehow the disciples have pulled this together and say these two look like what we expect. Okay? And then they're gone. Okay. Anything else you just look at this and that you see from there? Anything else you can see right off the hand? 3 tabernacles and booths. For he did not know what to answer, I like him. A cloud form overshadowed him and a voice. Okay, we're done with that one? I would like to go then to Matthew chapter 17. And again, in this case, starting at verse 1. And this time it's 1 through 8.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay?
6 days after Jesus took with him Peter, James, and his brother John, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud a voice said, "This is my Son, the Beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome by fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Get up and do not be afraid." When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone.
Okay. Any changes, anything different, anything that you didn't notice before?
Well,
Disciples fell to the ground.
Okay.
I probably would too. I think it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it would blow me away.
Jesus stirring them to get up.
Jesus touched them and encouraged them to actually get up. Okay, told them, don't be afraid. Okay, anything else you notice?
Well, the other one had it too, I think, but not only were Jesus' clothes changed, but his face was glowing with what we would call the glory of God. The glory came upon him.
I won't quite say that, but it does say his face shone like the sun in this particular translation. In other words, you got a glow, a big bright light from his face, as well as his clothes. Okay, it didn't mention it quite like that in Mark. Okay, so now we have him brighter than before. Now what's the next thing that is different?
Well, so when God spoke, "This is my Son, the Beloved,"
Yes.
I don't think he said the Beloved in the other text.
It was said, among you
In whom I am well pleased,
Right.
yeah.
Or whom I'm, yeah, okay.
Translation.
Keep going though.
Okay.
What else do you see?
And, well, of course, listen to him, but
Here.
to me, the listen to him is what he's all about.
That's going to be important. That's critical.
And Jesus says, "Don't be afraid."
Okay.
If we didn't
I
say
I also notice another parallel here that when Moses went up on the mountain and saw God, he comes down and his face is shining.
Ah.
He had to cover his face so people wouldn't be afraid of him.
Yes. Very good. Very good. Anything else you notice then? Anything else? There's something you're missing. Wow.
They finally just saw Jesus and no one else.
Yes. Well, take a look at the description of the cloud, please.
Oh,
Oh, the cloud was bright too.
You have a bright cloud. Now that's very important. In the Jewish tradition, God is the Shekinah. This is the glory of God. The bright cloud is God in this cloud. So you want to be noticing, it didn't mention that in Mark, it just said a cloud. But here it's a bright cloud. Again, trying to tell us that this is the glory of God coming right here, right now. God is there. Okay?
and this is not a storm.
Right.
Most clouds aren't bright, but this one must have been. Okay? Anything else? What were you saying?
Oh, I just say it was not a storm. A storm cloud is dark.
It's true. That's very true. Okay, and then we'll finally go, if there's anything else, and then let's go to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 9. Remember, Luke is putting this all together, you see. He's getting it from all his sources and putting down an orderly account. Starting in verse 28. And going through, good heavens, where, oh, there we go. And through 36, 28 to 36. Chapter 9, 28 to 36.
Now, about 8 days after these sayings, Jesus took with him Peter and John and James and went up on the mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly, they saw two men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. They appeared in glory and were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep, but since they had stayed awake, they saw his glory and the two men who stood with him.
Okay, stop right there. That's it. Oh, isn't it? Oh, no, there's more. Please continue. I'm sorry.
Just as they were leaving him, Peter said to Jesus, Master, it is good for us to be here, but let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Not knowing what he said. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him. When the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone, and they kept silent in those days, told no one any of these things they had seen.
Okay. What's different? What did we notice?
Well,
Lots of things are different.
Well, the first sentence alone is about everything up to this point is 6 days. Here it's 8 days.
Now it's 8 days.
But it says about 8 days.
That's right. It's
so-
close enough. It's
Yeah,
a
but I mean,
week.
it's
It's been a week.
Yeah, but yeah, you know.
But it's important because he's putting together the traditions that he's found.
Well, see, and the
As
other
a
thing about
writer.
that caught my eye was towards the cloud was the fact, first it says that the cloud came over them,
Right.
but then it says, conversely, they entered.
it.
So
Right.
I'm confused as to which they did, but my way I can view it is that when the cloud came over them, they were entering.
I would think it came over them and they were then in it.
Yeah.
That would be
Yeah.
my thing. Not that it landed up on top and they walked up.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it probably descended upon them. Okay. Anything else you're noticing?
And I could understand why they would be tongue-tied, and God said, don't say anything. Because I think they would be so overwhelmed, I don't think they would even know how to describe it.
Yeah, they didn't. Okay. See, what does it say later? They were sleeping?
Well, they were drowsy.
Oh, they were, and then they fully woke up, I'll bet they did, and saw his glory. Whose glory?
Well, I would presume it would be Jesus.
With
In other words, they weren't glowing with light,
No.
only Jesus.
only Jesus.
Yeah.
That would seem to be the case. The cloud came in glowing according to Matthew, but now only Jesus was bright. Moses and Elijah were not. The disciples had waken up, roused, when this cloud came in and it descended upon them. They heard this, and it scared the heck out of them. They fell to the ground, right? And then when the cloud was gone, only Jesus was there. What else do you notice?
Well, this one says what they talked about. About Jesus' departure.
So they're close enough to Jesus when this happens that they can hear what Moses and Elijah are saying to Jesus, right? And what are they talking about?
Well, clearly his departure in Jerusalem would
Correct.
would
Well, I
have
thought
to.
he already knew.
Well, but we can assume that this departure from Jerusalem, we have to assume that this was the resurrection.
Okay, or how they got to the point where the resurrection.
Oh, maybe, yeah.
We're going to, remember, he has to live by faith.
Yeah.
They're not going to say, you're going to go die and then you're going to be raised. They're going to say, go and challenge them. Go ahead.
Well, but, so there's another part to this too, and that shows the focus on the two old-time heroes are on Jesus.
Yes,
They're talking about his departure.
correct.
So it's not about them or what they did, it's about Jesus.
Yes, agreed. Anything else you see? Any thought? Question? Comment?
Well, also in verse 34, it looks like, says a cloud appeared and enveloped them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. So the disciples,
Uh-huh.
these 3 disciples were within the cloud also, and then
Yes.
the voice came.
Surround sound probably. It came from within the cloud. They were in the cloud themselves and they hear this, right? Makes sense that way. Anything else?
I don't get, the one part that I find interesting, is I don't get any sense that Jesus tried to help them totally understand. It was one more of absorption. You are part of this situation, and I hope that you somewhat understand. And then later it goes on into the, they talk together with Jesus later. But at that moment, I mean, I cannot fathom that they weren't so overwhelmed that they just, they're just gaga. I mean, what is going on?
These are tough fishermen type.
Yeah, I mean, and they're human beings. They're not, and they're, even though we are made in the image of God, this has got to be so overwhelming to them, because all of a sudden you take these individuals who, shortening up time if that's possible at this point, they went from being simple fishermen at the Sea of Galilee, every day just taking their nets, repairing, fishing on and on, this tediousness.
Right.
All of a sudden Jesus basically, and these are my words, grabs them up from off their butts off that boat, says, "You're going to follow me and do what I tell you." And miraculously they do, and then all of a sudden they're thrust into this moment.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, every step of the way, it's no wonder they had trouble understanding, because he threw, they're just being thrust at all these things at him.
Good.
And I keep thinking.
And he's not explaining these things.
Yeah.
He's saying, you figure it out, you have faith. Good.
Yeah, and to me, the point in the Old Testament that popped into my head, and I don't know why, that I thought about the strength of faith, was Noah. Noah was a simple man, and all of a sudden he is thrust very similarly, where God says, "Hey, look, you're going to build an ark." And he goes, "What the heck's an ark? What am I doing?" And all of a sudden God tries to explain to him, and he's just, again, he's a simple person being used by God to do something, and he's just, and I mean, I keep thinking to myself, if I were in my classroom and all of a sudden God came to me and said, "Leave your classroom and come with me," could I have done that? Would I have had the strength? And then all of a sudden be thrown in. I mean, this is a lot of stuff, these guys.
Yes. These guys are going through a lot.
Oh, yeah.
On our behalf. And they're trying to show us this.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then again, they're not supposed to tell anybody.
I know.
But and certainly talked about it among themselves. I mean, they must have been.
So
I'm sure they did that.
So-
they're going to do that.
But you gotta assume this story is actually in here for us
Yes.
after the fact.
Absolutely. Remember, all this is written 40 years later. Okay? That's when it's put down. But it's told up till that time, orally at least. Okay. Anything else that happens to strike you?
Well, this time they have God saying, "This is my son whom I have chosen."
Mm-hmm.
For it was the beloved.
Now that would be interesting. Chosen out of many?
Yeah. So mine just says, "My chosen."
Okay.
It doesn't
Which one
say.
where are you looking at that?
Oh, 35,
And
verse
the-
30.
9:35?
I have NIV.
Okay, 9:35. And the voice came out of the cloud saying, "This is the Son of me, having been chosen," would be a proper translation from the Greek. Having been chosen.
Regardless of the words, this is special.
Yes,
It's him.
this is the one I want you to listen to.
Yeah.
Okay. We've now got a lot of pieces together. Okay? Let's try and put it all together now. Okay, here we go. Jesus and his disciples left the region of Caesarea Philippi and, over the next week, made their way south of 50 miles to the valley of Jezreel. Okay, so they're going up from way up here, and they're traveling down to the valley of Jezreel, to this mountain here, called Mount Tabor. Okay? So that you see it, it's from here down to here. There's a mountain there that stands alone. Mount Tabor was considered a special place. On Mount Tabor, now here's the valley that it's in. As you come out of the north, you come down in the valley, there's Mount Tabor right there. It stands alone. It's dramatic. You can't miss it. Okay? I wouldn't call it much of a mountain, but in those places at that time, they didn't come from where I came from. But this is where it is, right there. Okay? And let's go on then. And I'll take a look at it. This is a special place. On Mount Tabor, Barak in the Old Testament and Deborah, and you remember Deborah in Judges, Deborah said to Barak, "Arise, for this is the day in which the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Behold, the Lord has gone out before you." So Barak went down from Mount Tabor with his 10,000 men following him. The Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and all his army with the edge of the sword before Barak. And Sisera alighted from his chariot and fled away on foot, but Barak pursued the chariots and the army as far as wherever that place is, and all the army of Sisera fell by the edge of the sword, not even one was left. Okay? So, already in history, Mount Tabor was important to the Jews, where they had, by a miracle, literally, and we'll talk about that. No, we won't. Pick that up in your Old Testament studies. Had defeated the Sisera army of Sisera. Now, here they come to Mount Tabor. And God defeated the Sisera in the time of the Judges, when God brought a storm and a flood. This is what that place would look like with a storm. Sure.
Again, are the numbers more symbolic than anything else? The numbers they give a lot in the scriptures are always, to me, humongous.
Well,
And I have trouble at grasping that, as other than to say these are symbolic in the sense of overcoming.
I think it's a good thing to ask that question. This is Mount Tabor in a cloud. Okay? Cloudy day, etc. Put 10,000 men up there.
Not much room.
Not much room. So, numbers are always, remember, writers are always adjusting things like that to better tell the story a lot of times, so that you don't miss the point of the story. Okay? But believe me, Sisera's army was big. So here's Mount Tabor in cloud. I took this picture. This is on the east side of Mount Tabor, as you're walking past it. Okay, Jesus and the disciples were teaching in one of the small towns in the area. Jesus took Peter, James, and John, this is his inner circle, up the mountain to be away from the crowds. They would be gone a couple of days. These three were the leaders of the disciples, and Jesus wanted to spend some special time with them. Jesus also wanted to commune with God. Now remember, we didn't mention that in Luke. He was praying. He went up to pray. You want to remember that. Okay? All right, here we go. It was an energetic hike up the steep western face. This is what it looks like, looking down into the cloudy area, because it's cloudy day. Straight down. It's a significant hike going up there. And there's a village down here, which we'll get to. Okay, any question, thought, or comment?
Could you make it up there again?
I don't know, I haven't been there.
You can make it up. Okay, let's see. But they arrived before the sun got too hot, so they started early and hiked up. Okay? You went up from the western face because it wasn't quite as steep as the eastern face is. Okay? The rest of the day was spent in prayer and discussions, away from the Roman garrison that was stationed on the mountain, closer to the eastern face. So you could hike up and spend time on the western side of it, but the eastern side had a Roman garrison. You didn't really want to go over there. Okay? So there's these two sides to the mountain. Okay? Question, thought, or comment? As evening approached, Jesus was off by himself and was deep in prayer when the disciples became aware that he was changing. It's my interpretation that this was happening while he was in prayer, not just because he was standing there. The skin of his face had become translucent, just as the face of Moses must have looked like on Mount Sinai. In Exodus 34, it came about when Moses was coming down from Mount Sinai, and the 2 tablets of the testimony were in Moses' hand as he was coming down from the mountain, that Moses did not know that the skin of his face shone because of his speaking with him, with God. Okay? An inner light is shining through his skin, is my interpretation of it. And the brightness of his spirit was shining through, yet it was not painful to look at, as the sun would have been. So it's not the sun gleaming behind him, hurting your eyes. It's a light and you can still look directly at it. It's different. Does this make sense? Thoughts, comments?
It's definitely something supernatural.
It's definitely something unexplained. It's really, wow. And the disciples, kind of sleepy as they were anyway, kind of look up and they see this change occurring in him. It's been a long day. It's been warm. It's been a long day. Jesus stood up as 2 men, also shining from an inner light, is my interpretation, approached. Not 2 regular men. There's something glorious in them. That's my interpretation again. Yeah. Though they had never met these men, the disciples knew who they were. Traditionally, the forked beard of the one and the camel-haired clothes of the other immediately identified them as Moses and Elijah. So let's look at Moses. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you and from your countrymen. You shall listen to him. And then Elijah. Behold, I am going to send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and terrible day of the Lord. Question, thought, or comment?
Something my mother always told me is, one of the things she took from this story, they could recognize Moses and Elijah, is that when we get to heaven, we're going to know who these people are. We're not going to have, oh my gosh, look at this crowd of strangers. No, we're going to know people. We're going to recognize them.
Yeah, and we'll probably recognize everybody there.
Yeah.
I mean, that's quite a family.
But see, that makes, the human part of me, that doesn't make sense.
Right.
Because it talks about that our human body dissolves away.
Correct.
That it is our spirit, and on the same note, I've said it before, I love the allegory of the fact that when we're born and we take our first breath, the spirit enters us. When we die and our spirit leaves us when we exhale our last breath.
Okay.
I love that. But in saying that, and I'm not disagreeing with you, Ann, what I'm saying is that I don't understand, that's going on faith. Because I don't understand how if it's just your spirit, which has no, you don't take your image with you, in a sense, in my mind. How you're going to do that. Because I've heard stories in my family tradition that when you get to heaven, God has chosen one member of your family to greet you who you will know.
Oh, interesting.
And to welcome you to heaven.
Interesting.
Now, I don't have any idea where that came
That's
from.
fine. It's interesting.
I know where it came from.
But so it gets back to what you were saying, Ann. That's knowing I have to go on just faith, because if there's a tidbit of that, that's wonderful, because I keep thinking, when it came, the one thing I've always prayed for, my father never knew his biological father because his dad was killed before he was born.
Right.
Okay? And I've always thought, under the circumstances you're talking about, what a wonderful gift God could have given my dad on his death in heaven. That the first person he would have met would have been his dad.
His father.
That still may be true.
Yeah. But I'm just saying, it's
Yeah.
getting back to what you always talk about.
So-
we go with faith.
Right.
So we have a long history of people going through near-death experiences, as we call them today. And what's the one common thread that you see after they go to the
Bright light.
light?
Mm-hmm.
is they meet somebody who's dead that they know.
True. It's true.
And my dad went through that. I mean, you hear about that numerous times.
Uh-huh.
And there's no doubt in my mind that when you see this, I mean, to recognize somebody in the afterlife is probably not a surprise. It shouldn't be a surprise. Recognizing Moses and Elijah while you're still alive, okay.
You depend on tradition there.
Right. But at the same time, if this were a vision, then
Right.
you can put anything you want in a vision.
You know in a vision.
Yeah.
You know. Regardless of anything, they do recognize them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? I happen to feel that my spirit will recognize your spirit when we're gone.
Mm-hmm.
I might even want to pretend I look like you when I see you. I don't really care. But I will know who you are.
Mm-hmm.
But that's my thinking. We don't know. I haven't been there yet. So let's go there. They spoke. Go ahead. Anything else first?
No.
Okay. They spoke to Jesus for some time, and the disciples overheard just enough to realize that they were talking about a new exodus of God's people, and that Jesus should lead God's people into a new promised land. This journey must begin from Jerusalem. I want you to think about why I said it this way. Okay, because we're going to encounter this as we go along as Jesus approaches Jerusalem. He is going to be on the east side of the Jordan River, and he's going to cross the Jordan River, as did Joshua. Okay, and he's going to move into Jerusalem, and they need a new exodus for the people, us. It's going to be difficult. This is just my thinking. We don't know. We could go with a literal interpretation, say he talked about how he was going to leave, how it was going to be accomplished. You're going to go there, you're going to challenge the authorities, they're going to reject you and kill you. Have faith. This is what God the Father wants you to do. And he will take care of you after that. Maybe even raise them from the dead. In which case now you can start, you didn't know this before, which is why the 6 days or 8 days earlier, when he said it's going to happen, I don't think that's reasonable. I think it's after this moment that he could then say to them, I'm going to go down, I'll be crucified, I'll be killed, I'll be raised from the dead on the third day.
Although earlier, when they were when they were at the gates of hell, it said that he talked plainly about his. Correct.
But if so, then why would he need Moses and Elijah to talk to him about it, about how it was to be accomplished?
Well,
you see, I just think that the authors tweaked it wrong, just a little bit. And that after this is when he could tell them that, because he would now have discussed it with Moses and Elijah. But actually, it really doesn't matter.
My take on this is that this is all for our benefit.
I agree with you. And we haven't reached that point yet where it's to our benefit. We've only reached the preparation so far. And here we go. Let's find out what is our benefit in this. When it seemed obvious to Peter that the three were through talking, he boldly offered to build 3 temporary structures for them, called booths, so that they might be sheltered for the coming night, assuming Moses and Elijah would now reveal themselves to Israel. They would need a place to stay. Reveal themselves to Israel. Why would they reveal themselves to Israel? Because they were scheduled to come before the end time. Mm-hmm. Right?
Well,
so, assumedly, that's what's happening now.
Still looking for the military victory.
Correct. So they're interpreting this as saying, okay, now's the time. There they are. We need to build. Then they'll reveal themselves to Israel. Israel will conquer the Romans and take over the world, etc., etc. Oh, yeah. So what you have is this misinterpretation. Shh, don't tell anybody about it, okay? Because you're misunderstanding it. Moses and Elijah were supposed to come before him, but this is not that moment. Okay? Oops again. Had he offered to build only one shelter, he would have been closer to the truth. Any questions, thoughts, comments?
Well, if this was going to be a military overthrow, this would be a good place to stage your command center.
It would be right in the heart of the Galilee.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And it's right where Barak and Deborah took out Sisera with God creating the flood. Okay, very good. Okay, here we go then. But even as Peter spoke, a shining cloud enveloped the three of them. 1 Kings 8. It happened that when the priests came from the holy place, the cloud filled the house of the Lord, so that the priests could not stand to minister because of the cloud. For the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. Here you have the glory of the Lord. Like a thick fog, with the rays of the setting sun illuminating the underside, maybe. This must be the Shekinah, the glory of God. Exodus 24. When Moses went up on the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain, the glory of the Lord rested on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it for 6 days. And on the seventh day, he called to Moses from the midst of the cloud. And the eyes of the sons of Israel appeared, and to the eyes of the sons of Israel, the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a consuming fire on the mountain top. Moses entered the midst of the cloud as he went from the mountain, and Moses was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. That is the Shekinah, God in a bright cloud. This is how God appeared to Israel early. Any question? Thought? Comment. The disciples were terrified. They dropped to their knees and buried their face in their hands. Then they heard a voice in their minds, or not, telling them to listen to the Word. The wisdom of God. Remember, the wisdom of God from the creation, created through that, God created all that exists. This is the Word of God, incarnate in the man Jesus. This is the wisdom of God. Listen to it! Okay?
I did also, in my mind, when I think about how this happened, if it were a vision,
Yes.
and they talked to each other clearly afterward,
Yes.
they all got the same
vision.
Right. It's not like I was dreaming, because you got it too.
That's right. And in the same basic detail.
Yeah.
So, whether it's vision or not, matters not to me. What matters is what's about to happen now. It hasn't happened yet, but it's about to happen now. And that's going to tell us something. And as they looked up, Jesus was standing alone before them. The fulfillment of the law and the prophets. Moses and Elijah are in Jesus. He is the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. Jesus, the Word of God, listen to him.
You could also say now, when they said that Elijah would return, you could also say, okay, he did, we saw him.
Yeah, that's right.
We're done with that.
We saw
part.
Moses, so there's the prophet. We would know now that Jesus is the Messiah, right?
You'd think.
You'd think. And they'll be glad to believe that he's the Messiah. They just miss that Jesus, that God, through his Son, is reinterpreting what he means by Messiah and new kingdom. The kingdom of God will not be on earth. It will be a heavenly kingdom. And Jesus is the new one who's going to lead them into that kingdom. And here we are.
Then it leads one to wonder if, how much of this was in these two, Peter and John, etc., how much of it was going on in their minds and not really happening?
Well, they got done afterwards and talked all about it, came up with a story.
True,
Yeah.
but I'm just saying, that just happened to pop in my head as well. But I was fascinated. I'm mad at myself because how many times have I heard that expression about Elijah and Moses? And I didn't catch it there. I should, I would have thought that.
Every time we go through things, we learn something new. We perceive it in a different way.
Yeah.
That's the strength of the church as a whole, is that you and I will perceive things somewhat differently, and what you then tell me over there, I can add into what I've got, what I can, maybe can help you, etc. This is how we learn what the Word is all about. All right, hang on there. Here we go back again. Mark chapter 9. I believe we stopped at verse 8. I want to pick it up at verse 9 and go through 13.
As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus gave them orders not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead.
See, now he's added that for sure. Go ahead.
They kept the matter to themselves, discussing what rising from the dead meant. And they asked him, why do the teachers of the law say that Elijah must come first? Jesus replied, to be sure, Elijah does come first and restores all things. Why then is it written that the Son of Man must suffer much and be rejected? But I tell you, Elijah has come, and they have done to him everything they wished, just as it is written about him.
Okay, any question about that? He's just explaining what had happened. There's no problem. Okay.
Well, it almost sounds like he's now equating John the Baptist. He doesn't say John the Baptist,
Yes,
but
he will. He will be doing that. He'll be doing it. So now I want to go with the next part of the story. And it starts right there. And someone pick it up in verse whatever that was.
I want to jump in for a second.
Go ahead.
In my teaching Bible here, it has a footnote on what we just read.
Okay.
And it says, Mark indicates here that John the Baptist has played the role of Elijah by preparing the way for the Messiah.
Which is what John wanted to do the whole time.
Yeah.
Okay. And so the way is prepared. But now you have Elijah and Moses together in Jesus. The law and the prophets. He is the pinnacle. Okay? This is the Messiah. Okay, read from there on. From there, when they came back to the disciples, they saw a large crowd around them and some scribes arguing with them. Immediately when the entire crowd saw him, they were amazed and began running up to greet him. And he asked them, what are you discussing with them? And one of the crowd answered him, Teacher, I brought you my son possessed with a spirit which makes him mute. And whenever it sees him, it slams him to the ground, and he foams at the mouth and grinds his teeth and stiffens out. I told your disciples to cast it out, and they could not do it. And he answered them and said, O unbelieving generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring him to me. They brought the boy to him. When the boy saw Jesus, immediately the spirit threw him into a convulsion, and falling to the ground, he began rolling around and foaming at the mouth. And Jesus asked his father, how long has this been happening to him? And he said, from childhood. It has often thrown him both into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. And Jesus said to him, if you can, all things are possible to him who believes. Immediately the boy's father cried out and said, I do believe, help my unbelief.
love that line.
I know you do. When Jesus saw that the crowd was rapidly gathering, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, you deaf and mute spirit, I command you, come out of him and do not enter him again. After crying out and throwing him into a terrible convulsion, it came out, and the boy became so much like a corpse that most of them said, "He is dead." But Jesus took him by the hand, raised him, and he got up. And when he came into the house, the disciples began questioning him privately. "Why could we not drive it out?" And he said to them, "This kind cannot come out by anything but prayer." Okay, anything right there that you'd like to mention? Okay. Just as he comes down from the mountain, there's a village. These are Jewish people. That's not going to happen up in Caesarea Philippi, Mount Tabor. The next morning, Jesus did not explain anything to them on the way down the mountain. Yet Jesus did tell them something new. He told them not to tell anyone what had happened until God had raised the Son of Man from the grave. They now were convinced that Jesus saw himself as the Messiah and not just as the forerunner. But then, where was Elijah who was to come first? They asked. That was the Baptist. Jesus reminded Jesus. Folks did not recognize him because God was not doing things according to their preconceived notions. And because I will not be acting as they think the Messiah should act, they will not accept me either. I know I just talked about it with Moses and Elijah. But God is bringing the eternal kingdom despite their blindness. Any questions, thoughts, or comments? The town at the base of the hill today looks something like this. There's the mount. This is the west side. And here's the village, which is now a town. Not very big, but it's there. At the base of the mountain, the disciples were becoming a sign to the gathered crowd. When Jesus and the three reached the bottom, they joined the other disciples who were having a rough time. Apparently there was a man with an epileptic child, which was also deaf and mute, which was understood to be the result of demonic possession. The disciples could not seem to cast out the demon, just as Gehazi, the servant of Elijah, could not cure the woman of Shunem, a town 5 miles away. Remember, I'm a person who talks geography, okay? And Gehazi, the servant, could not do it, and Gehazi passed on before them, laid the staff on the lad's face, but there was no sound response. So he turned to meet Elijah and told them, the lad has not awakened, he's dead. Okay? So in this area, Jesus is going to do something that Elijah did not. When Jesus heard of the problem that they couldn't cast out this demon, he immediately spoke with the father of the child to find out about the man's faith. Jesus was both disappointed and pleased. The father had faith in Jesus, just as he would have had faith in Elijah, but no more. The good news was that he was open to having Jesus help him to strengthen his faith. So Jesus immediately cast out the demon. That left the boy looking dead. Now the father needed greater faith to believe despite appearances. Then Jesus raised the boy up, just as Elijah had returned the son of the Shunammite to his parent. Question, thought, or comment?
In my career, one of the things that I spent a lot of time was working with children that had epileptic seizures. What jumped off at me was the sentence, "He looked like death." If you've ever seen an individual have a grand mal seizure,
Grand mal, yeah.
they do look like death when they come out of it. They cannot do anything. They are lifeless. And it scares people to death.
Yes.
And one experience that I had that, again, is very similar to this. When I worked for the Department of Institutions and Shoreline, there was a young man who had significant grand mal seizures. A young doctor came on the wing that was assigned by the state because he had gotten money from the state during his medical time to pay his bills. And what was maddening about that situation was the fact, to put it in perspective, the staff, there was myself, the attending nurse, the doctor, and one other person in the nurse, what they call the nurse's station, with the medication that could have helped this person. He was setting the table for the evening meal for the staff, for the kids, or young, I call them kids, the adults. And he went into one of these grand mal seizures. And we got everything out of the way of this child, and the doctor walked over, and he was literally thriving on the ground and turning black. Now, I've never seen a person turn black before.
Choking on the tongue possibly there?
Well, it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Black
And
is
the
still-
nurse was begging the doctor, she was in tears, begging this young doctor to allow her, because in medicine, you go with the highest person
Okay.
of authority.
Right.
That was the doctor, even though the nurse outranked him age-wise. We were begging, and she begged him, let me give him the shot. She had it in her hand to relax him. He would not authorize it. So when he left, the nurse went over to this person, and like was happening here, and soothed him and helped him get out. But he literally was the closest I've ever seen someone that looked like this is description. It fit it to a T. And you cannot imagine when a person goes. And I had a student up here at the high school similarly, and it is the most helpless feeling in the world. And in the case I was just mentioning, and to know you had the ability, like the disciples were saying, well, you told us we could do these things, and then all of a sudden you can't. And when I hear you in your commentary and in the scriptures, that kind of thing just jumps off the page at me all the time. And there's no rhyme or reason sometimes. And I cannot imagine the people around this child who loved him, this young adult, cared for him.
Poor father.
Yeah, it must have just been devastating. And all of a sudden, Jesus used it as a teaching moment and brought this child out, not only out of the seizure, but back to normalcy, if you want to call it that.
Yes. Yes.
Unbelievable.
Awesome.
Yeah.
But Jesus sighed. Jesus knew that the majority of his disciples, the crowd, and everyone else could not see who he, Jesus, really was, or what he was doing. They could not see beyond the physical. That required insight and faith. What a faithless generation. How much longer would it take before they could see with the eyes of faith well enough to be on their own as representatives of God to a darkened world? And folks, that's us. We are those representatives to a darkened world. Any last comment, thought, or question? The next time when we get together, we're going to question the authority in the kingdom.